I never thought my secret would come out like this. For years, I lived with the weight of it, the lie I carried in my chest every single day. A lie I told not only to my husband, but to my children, to my family, to myself. My name is Laura Mitchell, and for over 15 years, I lived what many would call a perfect life. A beautiful house in the suburbs, 3 wonderful children, a husband, David, who loved me more than I probably deserved. He was steady, kind, loyal, the type of man every woman hopes to marry. And yet, behind every smile, every family photo, I was hiding something unforgivable. Our children, Sarah, Michael, and Emily, were not David's biological children. Years ago, in the early years of our marriage, I made mistakes. I crossed lines I never imagined I would. The man I had the affairs with was someone from my past, someone who re-entered my life at a vulnerable time when David and I were struggling to start a family. I was weak, scared. And when I found out I was pregnant, I convinced myself that it didn't matter. David would be a better father than anyone else ever could be. And he was. God, he was. Every time I saw him cradle our babies in his arms, every time he whispered to them that he would always protect them, a part of me broke. I wanted to tell him, so many times. But how can you destroy the man you love? How could you rip apart the life you've built for a mistake you can never undo? So I stayed silent. I carried the secret, telling myself that the truth would serve no purpose, that as long as David was happy and our children were loved, nothing else mattered. And for years, it worked. Until the day everything came crashing down, with one simple blood test. David and I met when we were both in our early 20s. He wasn't like the men I had dated before. No games, no arrogance, no empty promises. He was calm, steady, the kind of man who made you feel safe even in silence. When he proposed, I said yes without hesitation. I truly believed we would build the kind of life people write novels about. And for the first few years, we did. We traveled, we laughed, we built a home full of love. We talked endlessly about having children. How many, what names we liked, whose eyes they would have. But then came the struggles. We tried for over a year to get pregnant. Each month that passed felt heavier. The joy we once shared turned into quiet disappointment. Doctor visits, fertility tests, expensive treatments, endless conversations that led nowhere. Every time I looked at David, I saw not just my own pain, but his. He wanted to be a father so badly. He would have done anything to make it happen. And I started to break. That's when he came back into my life. His name was Mark, someone I had known before David, someone who represented an entirely different chapter of my past. Reckless, passionate, dangerous. We ran into each other by pure accident at a coffee shop. We exchanged polite conversation, old memories. I should have walked away that day, but I didn't. The first time I met Mark again, it felt harmless. A simple cup of coffee between two people who once shared a messy, complicated history. But looking back now, I realize how dangerous that moment truly was. Mark had always been different from David. Spontaneous, magnetic, unpredictable. In my vulnerable state, his attention felt intoxicating. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in months. While David was so focused on fixing everything, the doctors, the treatments, the plans, Mark simply listened. At first, it was just conversations. We talked about everything and nothing. My marriage, his failed relationships, life. We told ourselves it was innocent, but deep down, I think we both knew where it was heading. The emotional intimacy quickly blurred into physical attraction, and I was too weak, too desperate to stop it. I craved that rush of feeling wanted again. Not as a struggling wife, not as a failed mother-to-be, but as a woman. And Mark offered that escape. The first time it happened, I cried afterward. I sat in my car in complete silence, unable to process what I had done. I told myself it was a one-time mistake, that it would never happen again. But shame has a funny way of convincing you that you're already ruined. So what's one more slip? And with every meeting, I drifted further from the woman I thought I was, until eventually, the affair wasn't just physical. It was a dark secret growing quietly beneath the surface of my marriage. The more hopeless I felt at home, the more I found myself answering his texts, meeting for casual lunches that turned into dinners, and eventually, into something more. Something I swore to myself was temporary, a moment of weakness that I justified as an escape from my own failure as a wife. And the worst part? A part of me enjoyed it. With Mark, there were no tears over test results, no tense doctor visits, no hovering sense of failure. When I was with him, it felt light, like the world outside didn't exist. I could forget the pressure, the disappointment, the constant ache that came with every negative pregnancy test. For a few stolen hours, I wasn't broken. I wasn't the woman trying so hard to hold her marriage together. I was simply wanted, and I let myself sink into that feeling far longer than I should have. Then, I found out I was pregnant. I convinced myself somehow that the timing lined up enough for it to possibly be David's, and even if it wasn't, I pushed the thought down so far, it almost disappeared. David was ecstatic. I saw the tears in his eyes when we heard the heartbeat for the first time. And in that moment, I chose to bury the truth. For him. For us. For the family I still desperately wanted. That one decision, to stay silent, would become the foundation of everything that followed. When I found out I was pregnant, my entire world froze. I sat there staring at the test, my hands shaking, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I should have been overjoyed. David and I had tried so long for this. But instead, I was consumed by a wave of panic. Whose child is this? The timing was blurry. My last encounter with Mark was not long before I finally conceived, but David and I were still trying during that same period. The dates overlapped just enough to create a sliver of doubt I could hide inside. And so I clung to that doubt like it was a life raft. I convinced myself, it's probably David's. It has to be. It's easier to believe that. That day, I made my decision. I cut off contact with Mark completely. I blocked his number, ignored his texts, and deleted every trace of him from my phone. I told myself it was over, that I had slipped, but I could still save my marriage, my family, my future. I was going to make this right by focusing on the man who had stood by me through everything, David. But the guilt didn't leave. Every night, as David placed his hand on my growing belly and whispered about how excited he was to meet our baby, I felt the weight of my secret suffocating me. I smiled for him. I laughed with him. I let him hold me when I cried. But inside, I was breaking. The guilt was constant, always sitting in the pit of my stomach like a stone I couldn't digest. And yet, I kept telling myself, if I just pretend hard enough, maybe it will all disappear. Maybe love will be enough to bury the truth forever. The day our daughter was born should have been one of the happiest moments of my life, and in many ways, it was. I'll never forget the look on David's face as he held her for the first time, tears filling his eyes, whispering, "She's perfect, Laura. She's absolutely perfect." In that moment, I wanted to believe it too. I wanted to believe that everything was finally behind us, that I had left the mistakes in the past, and that this child was the start of our fresh beginning. Family came to visit, friends sent flowers. The house was filled with joy, laughter, and congratulations. David beamed every time someone commented on how beautiful she was, how much she looked like him. He was so proud, so in love with this tiny life we had created. And I smiled along, doing my best to mirror his happiness. But deep down, something twisted inside of me every time I looked at her little face. Because I saw it. I saw him. Her features were subtle, but unmistakable to me. The slight curve of her chin, the exact shape of her lips, the delicate angle of her cheekbones. all echoes of Mark. Things only a mother who lived with this secret could recognize. But to David? Nothing seemed out of place. After all, both David and Mark had the same dark brown hair, similar hazel green eyes, even a similar complexion. To anyone else, including David, she looked like she could easily be his child. And so the illusion held. David never once questioned her paternity. He only saw love. He only saw his daughter. And because he never questioned it, I was able to keep burying the truth deeper and deeper inside me. But with every passing day, every coup, every smile, every milestone, I felt the guilt gnawing at me. The secret I had chosen to live with was no longer just my burden. It was growing, breathing, becoming its own quiet monster inside my perfect little world. And yet, life went on. By the time our daughter Sarah turned 2, life wasn't as perfect as it once seemed. The magic of first-time parenthood had worn off. The sleepless nights, the stress of juggling work and a toddler, and the growing financial pressure started to weigh on both of us. Money was tight. David was working long hours, and I was exhausted. The romance slowly faded into routine arguments about bills, responsibilities, and who was more tired than the other. I felt invisible. The house felt heavy, and my mind, once so firmly planted in our family, began to wander again. I knew where the cracks were, and this time, I willingly stepped toward them. Late one night, after one of our usual tense arguments with David, I found myself staring at my phone. My fingers hovered over Mark's name, my heart pounding. I hadn't spoken to him in over 2 years, not since I had blocked him when I found out I was pregnant. But in that moment of weakness, I typed a simple message. "Hey." He responded within minutes. "Wow, didn't expect to hear from you. How are you?" Our conversation picked up as if no time had passed. When I finally told him I was pregnant back then, his response was light, almost joking. "She's not mine, right?" he said with a little laughing emoji. I swallowed the lump in my throat and replied, "No, of course not." And just like that, I wasn't just lying to one man anymore. I was lying to 2. Mark surprised me by sharing that he had moved on, that he was in a serious relationship now, and that his girlfriend was pregnant as well. "I'm so excited to finally be a dad," he said. His face lit up as we FaceTimed for the first time in years. And yet, even with his own life moving forward, he didn't hesitate to suggest we catch up in person. I should have said no. I should have cut it off right there. But part of me craved it. The danger, the escape, the validation. The thrill of being wanted again. The same addiction to temporary comfort that pulled me in years earlier pulled me right back. And so, once again, I crossed the line. What started as one meeting turned into many. Coffee dates led to hotel rooms. We stole afternoons together while David was at work and Sarah was with her grandparents. It went on for months, a second double life building on top of the first, layering guilt upon guilt until I could barely recognize who I was anymore. Every time I walked back into my house, kissed my husband, and read bedtime stories to my daughter, I felt the weight of both men's trust pressing on my chest. I wasn't just trapped by my first mistake. I was now building a web so tangled I couldn't see a way out. A few months after my secret affair with Mark had quietly fizzled, I started feeling sick. At first, I thought it was just stress or exhaustion from chasing a toddler around, but the nausea lingered. The missed period followed, and then came the test. Positive. Again. I stared at the small stick in my hand, my stomach twisting into knots. Another pregnancy, another terrifying question. Who is the father this time? The timeline was blurry once again. There was a chance, maybe even a good chance, that the babies were David's, but there was also a chance they weren't. And unlike last time, the stakes now felt almost unbearable. I scheduled the first doctor's appointment, dreading the moment, but also trying desperately to hold on to hope. David came with me, holding my hand tightly as we sat in the dim ultrasound room. When the technician placed the wand on my stomach, I stared at the screen, waiting for the little flicker of a heartbeat. But what I saw caught me completely off guard. "Oh," the technician said with a soft smile. "Congratulations. You're having twins." David gasped. His face lit up like I hadn't seen in years. "Twins! Oh my God, Laura! Twins!" He pulled me into his arms and kissed my forehead, tears pooling in his eyes. In that moment, I wanted so badly to believe this was our miracle. That fate was giving us a second chance after everything we had been through. That these babies were his, and that somehow the universe was forgiving me. For a brief moment, the darkness inside me faded. The financial struggles, the arguments, the guilt. All of it was drowned out by the sound of David's excitement and joy. Our home felt light again, hopeful again. But deep down, the doubt never truly left me. That evening, I did what I knew I shouldn't have done. I messaged Mark one last time. "I'm pregnant," I wrote simply. His response came quickly. "You're sure it's not mine, right?" He joked again, trying to make light of it. I responded with the same lie I had told him before. "No, it's David's." He replied back, more serious this time. "All right, it's probably better we stop talking. My girlfriend's due any day now. I need to focus on my family." And just like that, Mark was gone from my life again. But the secret he left behind still lived inside me, now growing into not one, but two tiny lives. When the twins were born, Michael and Emily, it felt like a fresh start. The delivery was smooth, and both babies were healthy, beautiful, perfect. David was once again overjoyed, pacing around the hospital room, calling family and friends, practically glowing with pride. Our home was loud and full now. Diapers, late-night feedings, toddler tantrums, and tiny hands tugging at my sleeves. And somehow, despite everything, life felt functional. It felt good. The storm inside me quieted, at least for a little while. But as the months passed, I saw it again, the tiny details that only I would recognize. Michael's jawline had that same sharp cut as Mark's. Emily's smile curved just like his did, the shape of their noses, their dimples when they laughed. Small features, but unmistakable once you knew what to look for. The resemblance wasn't glaring to anyone else, but to me, it was like standing in front of a mirror reflecting my sins. David never suspected a thing. To him, they were simply his children. His love for them was unconditional, pure. He changed every diaper, read bedtime stories, sat up during fevers, and proudly took them to school events. He never once questioned whether they were his, because, to him, they simply were. The only message I ever received from Mark came a few weeks after his own child was born. "It's a girl. She's beautiful. Life's good." I sent back a simple, "Congratulations." And that was the last time we ever spoke. The door to that chapter fully closed, sealed shut forever. The years that followed were quieter than I expected. I focused on being the best mother I could be, and, oddly, on trying to become a better version of myself. I started therapy, privately, not to confess, but to manage the guilt that threatened to swallow me whole. I learned to sit with my choices, knowing full well that I couldn't go back and rewrite what I had done. But I could at least ensure my children had a happy, stable life moving forward. David continued to be the father I always knew he would be, loving, supportive, patient. Watching him with the kids broke my heart in ways I can't explain. He deserved the truth. I knew that. But I also knew that the truth wouldn't serve anyone anymore. It wouldn't change the past, and it would only destroy his world, destroy the family we had built, and devastate children who had no idea that any of this existed. So I told myself the same thing every single day. The best thing I can do for them now is to protect the life they know. And for years, that was enough. At least I thought it was. Sarah had always been healthy, full of energy, full of life. But one evening, she collapsed on the living room floor. Panic filled the house. David rushed her to the hospital while I gathered our things with trembling hands, barely able to breathe as I followed behind in the car. The doctors acted fast. She needed a blood transfusion, and thankfully, David shared her blood type. As they prepared for the procedure, they drew blood from both David and Sarah to run a full panel and ensure compatibility. In that moment, my focus was only on Sarah. Seeing my little girl, pale and hooked up to machines, nearly broke me. The transfusion was successful, Sarah stabilized, and the doctors assured us she would make a full recovery. David and I sat side by side, relieved, emotionally drained, holding each other's hands like we had done so many times before. For a moment, I thought maybe life would allow me to keep my secret buried just a little longer. But then the doctor returned. He was smiling, flipping through Sarah's chart casually, almost unaware of the storm he was about to unleash. "You're a wonderful father, Mr. Mitchell," he said lightly. "I was just curious. Did you two use a sperm donor by any chance?" David's forehead furrowed, his face tensed. "No. Why would you ask that?" The doctor glanced up, surprised by his confusion. "Oh, I just assumed. During the tests we ran, we noticed that there's no genetic relationship between you and Sarah. It happens sometimes when donor sperm is used. And I saw in your records that you two were here years ago for fertility consultations, so I thought maybe that was part of your journey." The doctor paused for a second, sensing the shift in David's expression, and quickly added, "I'm very sorry if I've made a mistake. Of course, that's personal information. Forgive me." He nodded awkwardly, then turned and walked away, leaving behind a silence that was heavier than any scream. At that exact moment, I walked back into the room, carrying a cup of coffee I had grabbed from the hospital lobby. The moment I saw David's face, I knew. His eyes were wide, hollow, empty. His skin was pale, his lips slightly parted as though he was still trying to process what he had just heard. "David?" I whispered, my voice cracking. Is everything okay?" He didn't answer. He just stared at me. And in that stare, I saw it. The wall I had so carefully built for years was finally collapsing. The secret I had carried for over a decade had been ripped into the open, and there was no way to hide anymore. David stayed calm, at least on the surface, not for my sake, but because Sarah was still lying in that hospital bed, recovering. He knew this wasn't the time to erupt, but his silence was deafening. I could see the storm behind his eyes, swirling with pain, anger, confusion. The man who always made me feel safe now looked like he didn't even recognize me. He stepped into the hallway and called his parents. "Can you come to the house? We need you to watch the kids for a while." His voice was cold, mechanical. I stood nearby, my chest tightening with every word. Once Sarah was stable and his parents arrived, he asked me to come with him. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low, controlled. But I could feel the rage pulsing underneath his composure. We sat across from each other in one of the small hospital conference rooms. His hands were clenched into fists on the table. His eyes locked onto mine, but they weren't the eyes of the man I married. "The doctor made a mistake, right?" he said finally, almost begging. "Tell me it's wrong, Laura. Tell me this isn't real." My throat tightened. My body shook. And for a brief moment I wanted to lie again, to hold on to the life we had built, but I couldn't, not anymore. My lies had carried me far, but they had finally caught up. I can't," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "It's true." The room fell into a suffocating silence. David stared at me, his face turning pale, his chest rising and falling as he tried to control his breathing. "How long?" he whispered. And so I told him everything. The affairs, Mark, the twins, the years of lies stacked on top of one another. Every word I spoke felt like another stab into the life we had built together. My voice shook as my world unraveled completely in front of him. "You let me raise 3 children that aren't mine," he said, his voice cracking, his eyes filled with betrayal. "You let me believe they were mine, for their entire lives." Tears streamed down my face. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought I was protecting everyone." He shook his head. "You were protecting yourself." I felt my chest collapse, and in that moment, I knew I had lost everything. The days that followed were even worse. David demanded full clarity. For his own peace of mind, he took each of our children, Sarah, Michael, and Emily, for paternity testing. The results confirmed what I had feared. Not one of them shared his DNA. And just like that, any fragile thread of hope I still had was completely severed. The kids were old enough to understand what was happening. Sarah was 15 by then. Michael and Emily were 12. When David sat them down and explained the truth, the devastation in their faces shattered me in ways I can't even put into words. They didn't cry, they didn't scream, they simply looked at me like I was a stranger. "How could you do this to us?" Sarah whispered. Michael refused to speak to me. Emily wouldn't even look at me. Within weeks, David filed for divorce. The house emptied. The family I had spent years pretending was perfect was gone. The kids chose to live with David. And as much as it broke me, I understood. I had destroyed their trust too. I lost not only my husband, but also my children. The life I fought so desperately to protect had crumbled entirely, and there was no one to blame but myself. My life as I knew it was gone. The house felt empty, even though it was still filled with furniture, photos, and memories that haunted me. My children, my own flesh and blood, were now living with the man who wasn't biologically their father. And yet, somehow, I understood. David had earned their love. He had earned the right to be their father in every way that mattered. It's strange how life works. I destroyed him. I betrayed him. And yet, in the end, they chose him. And I can't even be angry about it. Because if anyone deserves them, it's David. He was there when they took their first steps. He was there for every school recital, every scraped knee, every birthday party. He loved them unconditionally, without ever once questioning whether they were his. And when the truth came out, he didn't punish them for my sins. He protected them, even from me. I sit in this house now, alone, surrounded by reminders of the family I once had. There are days when the weight of my choices feels unbearable. Days when I still expect to hear the kids laughing down the hall. Days when I wake up and, for a brief moment, forget that I lost it all. Sometimes I stare at old pictures, birthdays, vacations, Christmas mornings, and I wonder how long I thought I could keep the lie alive. How long I thought I could outrun the truth. I never could have imagined that one blood test would be the thread that unraveled my entire life. But despite everything, despite the loneliness, the shame, and the heartbreak, I am, in some small way, relieved that they chose David. Because my children deserve stability. They deserve love. They deserve a father who never once failed them, even when I did. And now I have no choice but to move forward, even if it means doing so alone. Because that's the thing about life. Sometimes the consequences come years later. Sometimes the price for your mistakes isn't instant, but when it arrives, it takes everything. Years have passed now. The house is sold. The photos are packed away somewhere I don't dare open. The life I lived for nearly 2 decades feels like a distant dream I once visited. Beautiful at times, but never fully real. I don't hear from my children anymore. The last time I saw Sarah was at her high school graduation, from a distance. She didn't know I was there. I sat quietly in the back, hidden among strangers, watching her smile as David stood beside her, proud, beaming like any father would, like any father should. I never remarried. I never tried to build a new family. Because some wounds don't heal into new beginnings, some stay open, as quiet reminders of everything you threw away. I've spent years in therapy, trying to make peace with the woman I used to be, trying to understand why I made the choices I did. I've accepted that I was selfish, that I was weak, that my lies weren't about protecting anyone, they were about protecting myself. I often wonder if my children will ever want to know me again. I wonder if one day they'll see me not as a villain, but as a deeply flawed human who failed them. But that's not for me to decide. The most painful truth is knowing that while my love for them was always real, my actions made that love feel worthless. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Some secrets can live for years, but the truth always finds its way to the surface. And when it doesn't just destroy trust. It takes everything. I thought I was protecting my family. In the end, all I did was destroy it. Thank you for listening to my story. What is your story? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.